Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. On behalf of the City of Ottawa, I'm pleased to welcome everyone who is joining us for the second day of Enable Ottawa's 5th annual conference. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Enable Ottawa is once again being hosted virtually. In these difficult times, it's important for all of us to remain connected, and events like this serve as a gathering point for communities. I appreciate everyone joining us today, and I see that you have got some great guest speakers lined up. I'd like to thank Carleton University for the opportunity to partner with them in hosting this year's event. Je tiens à remercier l'Université de Carleton avec qui nous avons organisé en partenariat l'événement de cette année. Accessibility is about creating communities, workplaces, and services that enable everyone to participate fully in society without barriers. Events like Enable Ottawa spark conversations and ideas to break down barriers and facilitate inclusion in our communities. We continue to work towards making Ottawa a more inclusive city, and I wanted to share my excitement that we are partnering with Carleton University and joining the Canadian Accessibility Network. The Canadian Accessibility Network is a national collaboration of partners that advocates for people with disabilities. And it does this through research, design and innovation, education and training, policy development, and of course community engagement. The network provides a national voice to people with disabilities. It also brings together partners from across Canada to work collaboratively on tackling accessibility issues and barriers. Le réseau est le porte-parole national des personnes en situation de handicap. Il rassemble des partenariats de tous les pays afin de lutter grâce à un travail collaboratif contre les problèmes et les obstacles en matière d'accessibilité. We're proud to partner with Carleton University on this initiative and are excited to be building and growing national accessibility expertise right here in the City of Ottawa. Carleton University is recognized as a leader in accessibility, advocacy, research, and best practices, and we are fortunate to have their national leadership on accessibility issues, and we look forward to the benefits this will have for our residents in the future. The City of Ottawa is also recognized as a leader in accessibility, and we take pride in advancing accessibility for our residents, employees, and visitors. In the last year, we have focused on providing information on the COVID-19 pandemic precautions and vaccination sites in accessible formats to keep our most vulnerable residents informed as safe as possible. Now, throughout the pandemic, we have also continued to provide accessible services, programs, websites, and facilities, and I'd like to share a video with you about the many ways the City of Ottawa prioritizes accessibility in our city. Lastly, I encourage all of you to find innovative ways to include more accessibility in your daily work, and I would like to wish you a great day and a great conference. Thank you very, very much. Merci beaucoup et bonne journée.
Accessibility in our city. The City of Ottawa is creating an accessible and inclusive city for all its residents. Here's how we're making a difference. Moving around. All OC Transpo buses and the O-Train are fully accessible with low-floor, easy boarding, and a fully bilingual voice call-out and text display for upcoming bus stops. We also offer alternative transit options for persons with a disability through the Paratranspo door-to-door transit service. At city facilities, we resurface parking lots, lower service counters, install tactile signage, provide washrooms with accessible features, build entrance ramps, and install automatic door openers. We regularly maintain sidewalks, install new curb cuts, and add audible pedestrian signals and tactile walking surface indicators. Bylaw Services also works with new businesses to ensure parking lots are spacious and accessible. Programs. Recreation programs are available for children, youth, and adults with disabilities who want to participate and be active. Ottawa Public Health offers health and wellness programs such as Better Strength, Better Balance, and Healthy Babies, Healthy Children. Customers of the Ottawa Public Library can register for the Homebound program, which delivers reading materials to them monthly in print or audiobook format. The city also offers subsidy programs for qualified residents like the Hand in Hand program, the Essential Health and Social Supports, Tax Deferral, SnowGo, and SnowGo Assist. Interacting. We've made updates to improve accessibility to our websites and applications, which include accessing your tax and water bills in alternate formats. We've incorporated accessible tools during Ottawa's municipal election like large print ballots, magnifying sheets, braille ballot templates, and accessible voting tabulators. You can also find FM loop systems, microphones, amplifiers, and speakers at public consultations. When visiting City Hall, a beacon system application provides location-specific information to your phone via Bluetooth. Our commitment. We are proud to be a diverse and inclusive employer. City staff attend accessibility training and work closely with the City of Ottawa's Accessibility Advisory Committee. The work of this group and your feedback help guide the city's progress with the development of its municipal accessibility plan and serves as a roadmap for accessibility improvements in the years to come. We collect accessibility-related feedback through Service Ottawa and 311. Please let us know how we're doing.
Thank you so much for having me here, and really delighted to say a few words on behalf of Neil Squire as we introduce Dr. Christopher Power here to speak about his work. Just for those of you that do not know, Neil Squire is a Canadian registered national nonprofit, registered charity, and we serve thousands of Canadians across Canada. I would like to introduce Chris, who's going to talk to us a little bit. So Dr. Christopher Power is an associate professor at the University of Prince Edward Island on the east coast of Canada. I'm here in the Vancouver area, so we're literally doing this coast to coast with you here today. Dr. Christopher Power spent over 20 years working in accessibility to people with disabilities, and he's the vice president of the Able Gamers charity, which we're all excited to learn more about here today. He's also one of the inventors of the accessible player experiences design patterns, which has helped train hundreds of developers across the game industry and how to use this data-driven design language to make more accessible games. We've done some video game accommodations and adaptations. Able Gamers has been a long-standing leader in the space. I'm really excited to hear more from Dr. Power. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Christopher Power as we learn more about supporting gamers with disabilities.
Well, thanks very much, Chad. I appreciate that very much. Can I just confirm everybody can hear me okay? I'm sure the audience is just roaring right now that yes, they can. I've had no one say that they can't hear me, so I'm going to continue talking. Thanks very much for having me today at Enable Ottawa. As mentioned, I'm Christopher Power. I'm the Vice President of the Able Gamers charity, and I'm also lucky enough in my day job to work for the University of Prince Edward Island. I'm originally from Ontario, but I lived overseas for a while and have been in PEI for about 2 years, so it's really great to be engaging with the Canadian community again around accessibility. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about inclusion in games. I'm going to talk a little bit about the experiences that people have and what we should be thinking about. So after that really nice introduction from Chad, I'll just touch on what our mission is at the Able Gamers charity, is to create opportunities that enable play to combat social isolation, foster inclusive communities, and improve the quality of life for people with disabilities. Looking at this as a broad thing, what we're looking for is to provide an opportunity so everyone can find a game that they love. We do this through a combination of user research, which is the part that I lead in association with my research program through UPEI. Also our engineering research, which looks at building either bespoke solutions, or we've had a recent patent around design for controllers in a table to try to move controls so that people who can't hold a controller are able to work with it, for example. We have community involvement where we build that inclusive community so that our players, when they can play games, can find people who are welcoming and warm and partners in the gaming space. And most recently, we've had a lot of success with professional development with the game industry, where we've been training people through our certification program. So why should we think about accessibility? Well, when we look at the population of players out there and we look at the numbers from the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, and we start looking very closely at the numbers of people out there, they're big. So if we just take people who identify in the very raw way in disability surveys in the US, it's about 46 million potential players with disabilities in the United States, about 2/3 of the population of people with disabilities. We have 9 to 10 million people who identify as having disabilities here in Canada, so we're talking 6 million more people here in Canada. But in reality, there are millions of people around the world who do not identify as being disabled, who will use accessibility options, people with age-related disabilities, people who perhaps have undiagnosed aspects of their identity, or they just simply don't identify as being a disabled person. They will still use a lot of the accessibility options, the types of things I'll talk about in this presentation, and millions of our players play video games right now, with millions more looking for options to play. So as a recent history in accessibility, the game industry has pivoted rather quickly. So when we look back, when I started in accessibility, say a long time ago, I won't go into numbers, it was primarily the web that we focused on, but we had a variety of different industries coming up behind us in digital software, and one of them was gaming. And when we look at when I came into gaming and gaming accessibility in particular, as a lifelong gamer, accessibility wasn't even on my radar. And pre-2017, accessibility was really rare in games. We had some good examples here and there, but it wasn't a regularly present part of the design process, and it wasn't something that people talked about. In comparison, when we moved to 2018, we had the massive launch of the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which we participated in as able gamers, providing both feedback, but also ensuring that our players gained access to this device through our peer counseling support. And at the same time, PlayStation released a large number of accessibility features to their platform. These and other events sort of raised the profile of accessibility, and we were really pleased to play a part in that advocacy area with a large number of other people with disabilities throughout the space and online on social media. When we moved to 2019, that was when we launched our accessible player experience design patterns that I'll talk about today. We saw Xbox bring out a set of public guidelines, which were the first guidelines directly supported by a studio. And then in 2020, we've seen this massive surge of people not only talking about accessibility, but it being advertised as a major part of games. So when we look at 2020, we had Forza, we had Marvel the Avengers from Crystal Dynamics, The Last of Us 2 from Naughty Dog, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, one of my favorite games right now from Ubisoft, as well as a variety of others that were using accessibility as part of their advertising campaigns. This we recognize as a major shift in the industry and something that we're really pleased to have been part of. And we've also been working with those companies very closely, and we've certified over 100 people in the design methodologies we have around games that we've developed through our user research and professional development arms. I think that that's a big part of what we're seeing in the industry. Advocacy has been really important in the last 10 years to try to raise awareness. Able gamers, when we started 17 years ago, it wasn't even a word that developers knew. On the other hand, now it's a major part of the discussion of design. And it's very seldom that I meet a developer now who doesn't know what accessibility means. As a result, we're really shifting from this space where we're talking about advocacy all the time and making sure that we know that accessibility is important, to a space where we're really trying to take action and change the games that are being produced, as well as making sure that the technology and the hardware is there and available for people to work with, so that teams like our peer counselors can work with players to get them into the games. And I'll say, for all of those burgeoning game designers who might be out there, whether in the educational space or in the commercial space, or just making games for yourself, those who innovate in accessibility are going to be those that are addressing the emergent problems we have in this space. And they will lead the next decade. It's those who want to take action and push things forward, not those who are simply advocating for change. One of the things that we've tried to do is really conceptualize accessibility different. So when you look at a lot of software that's out there, so if I'm looking to pay my taxes, I have a goal. I want to pay my taxes, and I need to submit my taxes by this date, and I need to do these things to do it. There's a set of emerging goals that I can work with, and then my experience is shaped by whether or not I complete those things. Gaming doesn't work like that. We don't have a real goal of, I'm going to go out and do X. Now, there is a notion of playing within the game and that being a goal in itself, but when we look at what we're trying to do in gaming, we're almost always trying to have an experience. Gaming largely, not entirely, but largely is about experiences and trying to share those experiences with others. And that's why when we shifted our thinking toward experience, we started changing the way we talked. And this is our APX triangle, our accessible player experiences triangle, where we look at a set of layers. This is a path to design to get people to an accessible player experience. We want people to have a particular desired experience, but in order to do that, they first need to gain access to the player feedback loop, where they can put information into the game and then get information out. Then we need to be able to tune those challenges, because gaming isn't just about moving around a paddle in Pong or driving our favorite character through a set of challenges. It's about engaging with those challenges in different ways. And the obstacles for average populations can be impossible for some players to engage with if they don't have options to tailor them, and thus end up with a poor experience that is not accessible to them. So what we look at is this is a pathway from what we commonly think of as access, which is very common in our accessibility circles, to looking at a broader path to experiences. So what are we thinking about when we're talking about experiences? Well, we asked that question sort of looking around our team, and we kind of went, well, what is it people want in games? Well, in my world, we go ask people. So that's what we did. We went and asked a few people, more than a few actually. We talked a lot with our players with disabilities in our player panels. We had 122 questionnaires with players with disabilities. And then we also had 71 interviews with players with no known disabilities at the PAX East Conference. Within that, we found 6 key experiences that our players share between our disabled players and our non-disabled players. But then we also have 1 distinct user experience that I'll talk about. For our comparable experiences, we have connection. And this is perhaps the biggest one that people talked about, and probably the most important one that I like to talk about, because after the last 15 months, we all know what it is to be socially isolated. And what gaming brings to a lot of players around the world is the ability to connect with others and socialize, to have that fun experience that can be shared not only within the game, but also outside the game. A lot of our play, we talk about as part of our experiences in our lives, and it's being able to relate to others about the games that we're playing, which is really, really important, as well as engaging with the games themselves. We have a notion of diversion that emerged where people want to distract themselves from day-to-day stresses. So a game like Loop Hero, which is very meditative, and a game that I really love because it's very straightforward and I don't have to think too much, but I have to think enough that it's a game still, can be very relaxing. And for a lot of our players, it was about relieving stress, managing their mental health. And an interesting thing was we also found people talking about managing their pain through video games. We have this notion of winding down after a hard day, and I think anyone who's a gamer can kind of relate to that. When we look at comparable experiences, there's also this notion of escaping, and this is about escaping from the day-to-day world and visiting these wondrous worlds that are created in games. I want to emphasize this is not about escaping disability. People aren't looking to leave their disability behind, but it provides a different world for people to go in. And again, when we think about a world where we've all been socially isolated for 15 months, where we've not been able to go out and have been largely seeing the same 4 walls, we need to remember that as our world begins to open up, which I very much hope it will, there will be people who don't join us. And as a result, these sorts of experiences are immensely important that we make accessible. People talked about gaming being beneficial, which allowed people to develop skills in learning or things with the real world. We have a wonderful quote here about studying English or studying Japanese because of games. I've thrown up Assassin's Creed Valhalla because it takes place in Britain, and I'll share just a little quick story that we've been able to explore the place that we used to live in the past. So Ubisoft has recreated the city of York that I used to live in, and we've gotten to see with my kids Coppergate Market, which taught us a little bit about that, yes, indeed, that was what it looked like in a way that we couldn't just going to a museum in Coppergate. And as a result, you end up with this really rich experience where you're gaining and developing skills very naturally, but maybe without the sort of formal constraints of a classroom or a museum. One thing that people talked about that I really like a lot is the idea that games are culture and art. It has an intrinsic value in itself, and experiencing that creativity of others or creating within a game is very important. When we look at something like Minecraft, people are building their own worlds that they can play with, going as far as to recreate entire worlds like Tolkien's Middle-earth, to be able to explore, develop, touch, engage with. And that makes it a really unique and inspiring piece of art, the same as any novel or museum, such as what our players were talking about. However, the experience that I want to talk about a little bit is the idea of enablement. So in a lot of our world, things are not accessible. People are not able to participate in our broader society. Hopefully these things are improving as we have more conversations like this conference. However, games right now are providing a level playing field, a way for people to step in and engage with the game with their peers and have that experience of it being on an equal footing with them. As soon as we manage to get those experiences to a place where we can tune them and have access to them, people can share those experiences in a way that they may not be able to in the quote unquote real world. And as a result, these provide almost a distinctive experience for our players when we look at things like achieving or competition, where there are ways that we can engage even in cooperative means. So this is a really important aspect of gaming and something that was highlighted by our players with disabilities who very much feel that games provide them with that enablement. In order to help design these experiences, we've developed the design pattern language that we have talked about at the beginning of this presentation. Our APX design pattern language is a set of interlinked patterns that let designers work together in a team to think about accessibility early in design. We don't do this through a list of do's and do nots, which often game companies or developers of any kind can be quite allergic to, but instead looking at what are the barriers that our players encounter. These are the really important things to keep in mind, looking at what is the possible solutions in the broad and providing lots of examples. We also provide design drivers where we talk about the specific types of players that are helped so that people can connect them with the personas of the players that they're working with. So I'll talk very quickly about this path to access. If you want more information, please go to accessible.games, which is our website, which will tell you about APX, and that will be on the last slide here today. In the access layer, what we're really talking about is getting around the player feedback loop. We're looking at having the player interact with the game world through their input device and their controls, and then having the information about how they've changed their world come back through the presentation and eventually presented to them. We have a set of patterns that overlap in these different areas, and devices I'll not talk too much about today, but instead about the games themselves and how they can be customized and tuned for players. So we have, for example, same controls but different, which is talking about players who cannot effectively use controls in a game. And this affects a lot of different players, be they people with physical disabilities who need to remap controls, or potentially people who need to simplify controls for a variety of reasons. The design solution for this is to provide a way to remap and reconfigure, which we see in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which was one of the games that did this year, the ability to remap those controls. And one of the beautiful things about this is the tooltips and things in game that tell you your interaction, be it on a gamepad or in a keyboard, they will be updated as well. So it's a very rich and robust experience for that remapping. For some players, precision is an issue and a real barrier where they cannot be precise in their actions in order to be able to engage in the game, and thus being able to adjust precision around things like zooming or moving, navigating, targeting. These are all things that can be adjusted through either horizontal or vertical precision indicators, and also sometimes modifying that range of motion that can happen. And we saw some of this happening in Watch Dogs Legion, which was looking at, can we have our aim assist and our aim and look sensitivity changed to a higher or lower value to be able to target more easily. Distinguish this from that. This is one of our favorites from designers because they often know it already, where we're looking at allowing it that people can reliably identify differences in a game. So while this does impact people with color vision deficiencies or people who need to recolor a game for some reason, that's not the only thing that we're talking about. Too often our advice is very specific and very not generalized out to what the actual broad problem is. The problem is indeed often that people can't see color, but the reason that it's a problem or a barrier in a game or any other system is because people can't distinguish information and thus can't take action. So these are things that we need to think about as designers, that it's not just about these sort of technical reasons that things happen, but instead looking very closely at why and what is the barrier that's introduced because of these design choices that we make. So Fortnite's probably the most famous example of this, where you're able to choose a really detailed color scheme for yourself. Second channel, this is one that it looks at how can we take in information from the game and changing our modalities. And we have a wide variety of these. And I'll just give one example from The Last of Us 2, where they added in audio cues that gave information, sound information, so that people with low vision or blind players are able to play this game using just audio cues to navigate around. Once we have those access levels looked after, those access patterns instigated in our games, we can move to challenge. And this is really about tuning to the individual and often match with game design that we already know. So we have a variety of different patterns in here, and there's a set that are about tuning the player's own experience. So it might be about giving them an opportunity to train. It might be about giving them the opportunity to rewind to a safe point. It might be the ability to an undo, redo. It might be the ability to slow the game down. Or it might be, as you see with the little smiley faces there, it might be about moderating the emotional content in the game. We also have a couple of other patterns that are about playing alongside people. So either playing alongside a virtual person with an AI assisting you of some kind with our helping hands, or players playing alongside one another, sharing controls. And these are perhaps the nicest examples where we have, for example, helping hands that within the game change the game itself so that players can meet the challenges within them, and people are able to have a game assist meet them partway and share the load. We see this in a variety of settings, especially in simulation games like driving and Forza. But if we turn to even modern games, they started looking more deeply at how can we modify and tune very simple changes. When we move beyond that simulation with the newest Forza, we start looking at things like The Last of Us 2. They're really allowing you to tune different aspects of the challenges within the game. So here, whether or not your enemies are aggressive or not, but also things like how sensitive is the stealth system. And this is a really interesting change that's happening in the game space right now that I'm really excited by. It's moving out of that simulation area and allowing you to really, really hone those challenges in different ways. Play Alongside taps into a lot of our social side, the socialization and the connection ideas in our experiences. And this is where someone is unable to progress through a challenge as a real progress blocker, and they need the assistance of another player. Games that allow someone to play alongside and share the load together are really interesting experiences and unique to themselves. We've seen this very recently in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where people are able to distribute across the two different controls so that different controllers can control different aspects of the game. We've seen this in other places as well, such as Unravel, which is a beautiful game of little wool people. And these are things that we're starting to see show up more and more in games. So just to wrap up a little bit, I want to make sure that I don't run over and leave a couple of minutes for questions. I want to say that this is really about making it so everyone can game. It isn't just that the future is inclusive. It really now can be inclusive. We are seeing remarkable strides in the game industry to really change these things. The path to inclusion is about gaining access first, gaining access to that player loop. And once we have that sorted out, we can then look at how can people tune challenges. One of the mistakes we're seeing is that people put sort of all kinds of puzzle assists in, but if someone is unable to even move around in a game, they'll never reach that part of the game. Gaming has seen a lot of major shifts in just a few years, and I want to see that momentum continue. And I think the best way to do that is to understand that we're targeting experiences. It's not just about making a game accessible. It's about gaining access to those experiences that we all enjoy. So thank you very much. That was a very quick presentation, a very quick tour. And I'll take some questions now. There's been a couple of questions that have come through to me. Let me just read them. So the first one is, what do you wish players with disability could do more of in the future, and what needs to be improved moving forward? So I think right now, one of the things that we're seeing a major change, and it's something I hope that's going to continue, is we need the involvement of players with disabilities in the world. Now, I think that one of the really interesting aspects of it is when we start looking at how our games are made, there's not been a space where people have been able to come in. COVID has changed that. A lot of the game industry has had to stand up remote user testing. And that is a major shift that I think we're going to see, that whereas a lot of players with disabilities were unable to travel to a studio, now we're seeing a lot of the game industry willing to engage in remote user testing with those players. Our player panels allow facilitation of that, where people are able to recruit players with disabilities to test or provide feedback on their games. And that's something that I think I would love to see improve going forward. Another question is, what could we do to collectively help accessibility in this space? That's a really interesting question, because I think the world is very different depending on what part of the space you sit on. If you are an influencer in the community, or you are someone who is sort of playing in the online space, I would say that it's our responsibility to be kind to people and ensure that we are being inclusive in the way that we behave. So may that be language, or the way that we welcome people, or potentially the way that we change the way we play. So there are house rules that could be put in place so that players with disabilities can play alongside, where we don't have to worry about, for example, what controllers people use. We are seeing a shift that's starting to happen, for example, that we have cross-play where people on keyboards can play with people with non-standard controllers, and that's a big boon. Allowing that to happen and not gatekeeping it and saying everyone has to play with a keyboard and mouse is a big deal. But also subtle things like adjusting our language, ensuring we're not using terms that would be insensitive, is a really important part, especially in game culture where things can often go off the rails.